All right, the New South Wales government has scrapped its plan to add a third flagpole to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, deciding to relocate the New South Wales state flag and replace it with the Aboriginal flag. The New South Wales flag will instead be part of some new redevelopment of Macquarie Street in Sydney CBD near Hyde Park. Well, the Premier, Dominic Perrottet, says the $25 million saved by not erecting a new pole will be spent on indigenous initiatives. Let's bring in Indigenous leader Warren Mundine to discuss this. Warren, thank you very much for coming in. The idea that you would have anything vaguely looking like a flagpole that would cost you $25 million was daft and obscene right at the very beginning.
Of course it is. I'm no flag engineer, but I can work out that 25 million is a bloody lot of money.
Who put the receipt in for that, or who put the tender in for that? They were joking, weren't they?
I don't know who did it, but I tell you what, I made my offer. I could have done it for half that price.
Yeah, like about half $1,000, maybe even $500. So they've given the state flag short shrift. It's going near Hyde Park somewhere, and the Aboriginal flag will stay where it's been for the past week during NAIDOC week. Are you happy with that resolution?
Look, I'm happy that we've saved $25 million, and I'm happy that they're going to spend the money on some Indigenous initiative. I hope it's about getting jobs and getting people into businesses and that. But, I'm pretty cool about it. I was down Circular Quay today and I looked up at the bridge because the bridge is an international icon. Everyone knows it in the world, and it looked pretty good having the national flag there and then having the Indigenous flag next to it. It looked pretty cool.
The positive is that you're representing Australia's ancient history coupled with Australia's modern history, and you're respecting both. I can see the relevance of that. I just worry that we're getting rid of a state flag that represents 8 million people in New South Wales.
Yeah, that's true. But look, out of all the state and territory flags, I think the Northern Territory one's probably the best. The rest of them are pretty crappy. Yeah. I think, my only advice to Dominic Perrottet, the Premier, is let's look at a groovy new flag for New South Wales. I think we deserve it. You look at the state flags in the United States, they're pretty good. You look at the ones in Australia and they're not that flash.
It looks like a business card, the state flag of New South Wales. I want to talk about politicians who try to symbolise. They try to appease groups like Indigenous Australians with a new flagpole and want to spend $25 million. As it's turned out, $25 million, if you're using it at the front line, if you're using it in disadvantaged Aboriginal communities, it's ended up in the right place. Yes. Where it should be. Forget the symbols, do something about disadvantage. We can do a lot more.
Well, look, my first choice wouldn't have been about putting an Aboriginal flag on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It would have been looking about how do we deal with all the multiple issues that are in Aboriginal communities, about education, about jobs, about getting businesses there that can get those employments going, and about housing and a whole wide range of other things. So it wasn't my first choice, and I think we need to focus back on those things. It's all very nice to have symbolism, but at the end of the day, we've got to have some practical outcomes.
Okay, another subject, probably a subject we'll return to dozens and dozens of times throughout 2022 and 2023. The Labor Party want to go to a referendum and put to the public that there needs to be an Indigenous voice to the Parliament. I worry that we don't have enough information to make a reasonable or have a reasonable opinion about this. Do you think we need sort of a separate parliamentary advisory board outside of the two houses of Parliament to tell the government what needs to be done about Aboriginal affairs?
The thing that I worry about, and look, there's virtually no information about what it is and what it's to do. In fact, when you talk around the streets of Sydney here or anywhere, people don't have a clue what it's all about. And the big question for me is, okay, why do we need this? I go to Canberra a lot, as you probably know. I'm tripping over Aboriginals from all over the place who are lobbying ministers and having meetings and conversations. You get health, education, a whole wide range of people like that. And then each minister at state and federal levels actually have their own Indigenous committees and all this type of stuff. Look, I haven't been sold on the idea. Putting it in the Constitution, I definitely haven't been sold on it, because once you put something in the Constitution, what if it doesn't work? How do you get rid of it? How embarrassing this whole thing's going to be. Me, if you're going to do it, and I'm not a great supporter of doing it, is why don't we trial it as by legislation? work out all the problems and how it should operate. And if that comes clear, then you can talk about other things. But putting it in the Constitution is a big step.
Because you make a great point here. Admit that it may not be the way forward. So be real, be honest, and trial it. Because we've had so many stop-start attempts at dealing with Aboriginal resources or dictating decisions for money to go into Aboriginal communities. Not all of it has worked.
No, we've done it about 3 or 4 times, and they've failed miserably. The real difference is when you got people sitting in the chamber, and now we've got over 5% of the federal parliament now is
which
Indigenous.
Is higher than the representation of Indigenous in the population.
Well, they got the vote. They got a vote which is good, just as good as anyone else.
Yes.
They're representing all Australians, and they're able to take that on board and make the difference.
And they're quality members, Warren. We should not underestimate the quality of the members of Indigenous MPs in the parliament.
And it's only going to get more. I predict there's probably another 3 or 4 that will go into the parliament over the next few years. We've got them at state and territory levels. We've got attorney generals. We've got treasurers in some of the state governments and territory governments. So we've got these amazing people in there. Why do we need something else? A more bureaucratic, spend a lot of money. I'm just not into it.
I heard an argument from an Indigenous leader during the week to say, well, although we're well represented, we may not be represented in the future. I thought it was a fairly facile argument. I think they're well represented, and right now, if they don't know what's going on in Aboriginal communities and what Aboriginal communities really need, you're not going to benefit from another committee of people telling you a different thing.
No, well, you look at people like Jacinta Price, you look at Linda Burney, who have been around the traps for years, and they know the communities, they know what's happening out there, and they're able to actually bring that to the parliament, and not only just talking about Indigenous issues, but about the whole Australian community, about how we all are together.
Good to get your feedback and your insight. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure, mate.